So look, welcome. This is actually my first official event as the new director of CERC, the Christian Education Research Centre. Previous to my appointment, Peter Williams was director, doing a great job. As we all know, Peter has moved to become the Associate Education Director at the North New South Wales Conference Office. So because there was a hole to fill, they thought, who could we get to do this role? They asked numerous people, and in the end, I said yes. But I'm excited about the Christian Education Research Centre. I really think that in research, Avondale's gone through some phases. And I think one phase that we've been very focused on has been having enough quality research and having that in the quantity that would enable us to be a university. But now that we are a university, I actually think that we can move into a slightly more mature phase where we're looking at research and research projects, and we're saying, how can we generate knowledge and information in education so that we can enable Christian education in particular to advance? So that's why for our first sort of CERC research presentation, we've got two papers. One I've asked Jason to present on about aspects of teacher training, and the other one I'm doing myself on looking at student spirituality. We're very aware there's some people online, and so we're also aware we're going to try and keep to a schedule. So Jason's going to go first, and I'm very interested. Now, Jason's a very busy man. He is just a reproductive, amazing giant and got 5 kids. He is building a house. He's working full-time in Avondale. And so when I said to Jason, I'm going to ask you to do the first presentation at CERC, he was just so eager. But I did twist his arm. So thank you, Jason. Looking forward to hearing your foot, right?
Thanks, Peter. I was actually a little bit nervous when I was asked to do this research presentation because I knew I'd be talking to some really great minds. And I quickly went to see who I was actually presenting with. And as soon as I looked, I thought, people are going to make comparisons. And as soon as I looked, I just felt a lot better. So thank you. Thank you, Peter. I want to just welcome special guests. No one more special than my mum and dad. So good to see you here this morning. Yeah, thanks for giving me a chance just to share some stories, stories that I'm really passionate about, stories about research, but stories about my life, stories about MOTO, Ministry of Teaching Overseas, that are all linked together to inform us about quality teacher education. So where does the story start? It probably starts around about here when I was about 16 years old, and our church, Castle Hill Church, gave us the opportunity to be involved in I think it was a 2-week mission trip to the border of Thailand and Burma. And it was run by Ian Howie, for those that know Ian, and it changed my life. While I was there, we were building a school, but we were forming relationships with the locals, and it was there that I discovered the joy of service. It was there that I discovered that life becomes epic when you start using any gifts you have to make a contribution. It was also there, I think, that I started to believe that maybe teaching was something I enjoyed. I could enjoy. At nights, I was with the students over the candlelight, actually doing some teaching, very basic teaching, but I enjoyed it. And so that story actually impacted future stories. I was asked by ADRA to set up an adventure site in Cambodia in the year 2004. And so I think because of the previous experience I'd had, it once again ignited a passion for me to pursue service. And so I spent a little bit over a year in Prevahir province of Cambodia. And that story linked to this story. A student in, I think, her second year, Michaela Colmer, for those that know her. She's a passionate young lady. It was my first year teaching high school students how to teach. And she stormed into my office with this brilliant idea. She said, how about rather than going to a local domestic setting, why don't we go where we're really needed? I've heard there's this school in Azora, India. Why don't we go there? And so that fire, once again, from my previous stories, started to burn again. And I went straight into Peter's office at the time, and I shared the idea with him. Anyone that knows Peter, he's a yes man. And so much of what I talk about today, I give credit for Peter. He's a visionary, he's a massive support, and he's someone that actually makes things happen. So we said yes, and we ran it through all the processes, and this was our first experience to India, and there were 12 students. Those trips continued. It wasn't many years later, and there was so much interest, we started a second trip, and this time to Cambodia, to a school just out of Siem Reap, run by Tim and Wendy Maddox, Australian. We'll call them Australian. They grew up in Perth, but they've been in Cambodia now for close to 30 years, running this particular school and orphanage. Amazing people. it continued to grow and to the point that we actually had to introduce a third trip. And this is a photo of our first team in Nepal. We went through some turbulence here. We went through some interesting times in our global setting, and so we had to adapt to that. And so we came up with a fourth setting, working with high Indigenous schools in Darwin. And so this was our first trip to Darwin. Incredible experiences again. It was in 2020 that we decided we needed to actually explore the South Pacific, and we ran our first teacher education placement in the Kingdom of Tonga. This is the photo of the most recent trip, which we actually ran in the last break between semester 1 and semester 2. And there were 23 Avondale pre-service teachers on this particular trip, and we went to 3 Adventist schools in the Kingdom of Tonga. So if we have a look at the overall story of MOTO, Ministry of Teaching Overseas, the whole concept is using your gift of teaching to make a contribution in a developing country. And so this sort of shows what we've done since 2007, since that first trip. And the magic number that we're up to in terms of Avondale students that have actually taken part in one of these trips is 406. And that's a culmination of 25 different experiences. Something really exciting about the last trip to the Kingdom of Tonga is this is the first time as a university we're eligible to actually apply for government funding to actually assist with this. And there was a team put together. I want to thank Kevin and Darren, who were in my office or on the phone close to midnight of the night of submission, we'll remember. And we were successful at receiving a $53,000 grant from the New Colombo plan. And so the students that actually took part in the 2024 MOTO experience were completely paid for. Their airfares, their travel insurance, their food, their accommodation. It was a $53,000 grant that covered all of those things. So they were very, very blessed, and I think they know that. It was somewhat after a few years of running MOTO that people would always ask me when I came back to Australia, hey, why do you do this? And what actually happens to young people when we take them to developing countries? And to me, it was something I was really passionate about, but when I actually came to give my response, it just felt inadequate. It was sort of like having a dream where you really want to fight, but your arms are tired, or you really want to run, but your legs don't work. I wanted to share about the thing I was most passionate, but I just felt like I didn't have the words. And so that's what actually was a catalyst for me enrolling in some study in this particular area. And this is the question that actually formed the platform for that study. So what is the nature of the impact of an overseas professional teaching experience in a developing country on a pre-service teacher's stories of self? And this is what I actually found from that study. And I knew that any good presentation has a handout. So we look forward to this one. And then Peter, I'm sure you'll have one afterwards. So this is actually just an A3 sheet that actually shows my findings. And as we just discussed for the next 15 minutes about the findings, not all taken by me, I've invited some Avondale students to talk into this space as well, so you can hear from them how they were impacted from this last experience. I thought you may actually want to have a proper look into what I actually found when I was actually researching the nature of this impact. So to keep it really simple, there were 2 parts that I really focused on in this study. The first one is what changes in our students from overseas teaching experiences. So what actually changes in them? Really, really simply put, I believe that they develop new stories and they're connected stories of self. So these stories may connect their behaviors to their belief. These stories may explain their purpose and meaning. These stories may actually reshape how they see others and themselves. These stories may actually change the way they see their future and what they're planning to do in the future. And definitely they change the stories about their teaching and learning. You'll see there's more written in that diagram. If you want to know what I found from all of my research about how their stories changed, it's more comprehensive than diagram. But this idea of changing your stories, it may sound insignificant, but when you actually change, for instance, a story of yourself, your whole world, your whole perspective, your belief in yourself, belief what you should be doing changes with it. And so rather than just rattling on, I wanted to just introduce to you Scott Thompson, who's sitting over here. Every night in Tonga, he was one of the 23 students that we took to Tonga this year. Every night we gave out awards for people that were just excelling in service and excelling in the country. And I will say that Scott got more than his fair share of these particular awards. And the reason he was really encouraged by his peers. He was constantly immersed with people in Tonga, and he was excited. He was loving every moment. And so remembering that the main change that happens is we change our stories. Our stories change as a result of taking young people overseas. I thought, why don't I invite Scott to share how his story may have slightly changed as a result of 3 weeks in Tonga. So thank you, Scott. So Scott's a secondary, yeah, give him a clap. Scott's a secondary teacher. He's studying music as his major.
Yeah, so I've been studying at Avondale since 2020, actually. So I started with outdoor leadership, which was a lot of fun. And then I did a bit of nursing. And in the end, in 2022, I decided to do music. So I did my first semester of music as a Bachelor of Arts. And when I had a look at my HEC stat, I was quite surprised at just how much a Bachelor of Arts costs. And so I did a bit of reading and looking into it, and I discovered that if I did teaching, I could get the same content as the Bachelor of Arts, but I could get a Commonwealth supported place, and that would drop the price right down. So I decided to do that, and I was, so it made sense to do music. I was also interested in history, so I added that in as a minor. And prior to that, I had never considered teaching because I was homeschooled from kindergarten through to when I finished school. I'd never set foot inside a school, had no idea how the system worked. But I found I was enjoying my lectures. I was enjoying the units. It was good fun. I didn't want to do a prac though, because that felt like a bit of a confronting thing to do, considering I didn't understand how anything worked. So I actually pulled out of Intro to Teaching in 2023 before census date because I didn't feel ready for the prac. But then in this year, I was like, okay, I actually do have to do a placement. And I heard about the Tonga trip. And this was really interesting to me because my grandfather taught in Tonga in 1994 and 1995. He was deputy principal at Beulah Adventist College, which was one of the schools that Jason had mentioned we would be going to. So I felt that if I was going to do a placement, it would be great to do it there because it would be exploring a bit of a family connection, and I'd be doing it with friends and it would be fun. So I arrived in Tonga and I was very nervous, not sure what to expect. But in the end, I stood in front of the classroom on the second day was when I taught my first lesson. And I finished, I was nervous beforehand, but when I finished it, I had a smile on my face. I had had fun, and I thought that my students had had fun as well. And from there, I found that my thought processes around teaching started to change. I was involved with the brass band as well. I helped lead rehearsals and conducted them for a little concert thing. And I was finding that perhaps teaching wasn't such a bad idea after all. And that feeling just grew gradually over the course of the trip until by the end, I discovered that my entire thought process had changed to the point that I actually was really keen on being a teacher. And I know that I had a really good introduction to teaching in Tonga. All the kids love music, so they were enthusiastic, and that made my job so much easier. But now that I've had that experience of the good side of teaching, when I go to an Australian school, which might not be the same, it'll be more challenging, I'm sure, but I can actually view it as a challenge instead of putting it in the too hard basket and deciding it's not for me. So instead of thinking it's too hard, I don't want to do it, I can think, how can I make this more enjoyable? How can I make it more fun for my students? And then it didn't only change my thoughts about teaching, it changed my entire worldview as well. In that prior to it, I knew that it was better to, money isn't everything. But I was in the teaching, once I'd finished, I wanted to go to a remote school and earn as much money as possible and finish quickly and do something else. Now I understand the importance of it being a mission, and I do see it as a mission and calling. Yeah.
So yeah, I guess when we look at numbers of 406 students engaging in an experience like this, it becomes powerful when you realise that there are impacts as great as Scott's had, and hopefully they are now out in the world actually using those experiences to change it. So in addition to finding out what changes in people, the stories of self, I also wanted to find out in my study, what are the ingredients of a quality teaching experience? Sometimes we think you just take a group anyway, any group you like, take them overseas and magically things happen. Whereas I honestly believe you could take 23 students to a country and they would learn nothing. So what are the ingredients to actually ensure that these experiences that we take our students on in developing countries are quality? And I found from that research, you'll see on the paper, there's 3 distinct circles that surround the larger circle in the middle. And the first one is the challenges that the students encounter. This is a photo in Tonga of April and Dakota's class. There were some missing on that day, but I promise you they had 50 kids in their class and the classroom was small. So obviously managing 50 kids is a challenging experience. And I can also tell you that while in the Kingdom of Tonga, English is a language that a majority of people speak, the level or the quality of English is low. So teaching 50 kids who are in, I think, grade 3, who speak limited English, add that to equation and the challenge gets greater. And then if you add that the resources available to these particular students are minimum, in terms of that, photocopying, they can have limited access to textbooks and internet. All of those things are not as easy as they find in Australia. And I love that, because what I've found from this particular research is it's the challenge that actually impacts the quality of the learning. So we don't actually want to shy away from challenge. We want to make sure they're well supported. So so here are just a few photos of them in their classrooms and in their schools. This is all of the students that went to Hilliard Memorial School. And so that brings us to not just challenge is important, but if you actually want to balance challenge, you can't just throw them into a challenging environment with no support. It needs to be coupled with a high level of belonging. So I'm actually going to ask Alihon to just come and share. This is Alihon in his class. I believe it was year 6, Alihon. And this is also at Hilliard Memorial School. And I've asked Alihon just to share with us how belonging impact his time in Tonga.
Yeah. Hey guys, my name's Alihon. And yeah, I was one of the 23 students that was lucky enough to get supported by the NPC or NCP Columba plan. Oh, the mic is working? Oh, hello. And something that I really found valuable over the time of my that I spent on this trip was belonging. And for those who don't know, I'm of Samoan heritage. And if you know something about Samoan and Tongans, they are sibling countries, but they also kind of hate each other. So it was going on the trip, I was super excited. But when I had applied, I called my mom and she was like, "What are you doing?" And I was super anxious and I was super stressed. What was going to happen when I would enter the Tongan classroom? Would the kids receive me well? Would they hate me? Would they throw things at me? But that was not the case at all. When we had entered the school, the very first moment we hopped out of the bus, there were students who didn't even know our names. They ran to us. They were hugging us. They were giving us different items and things. And the sense of belonging that I felt was just, this was where I was meant to be. In that moment, God had put us there for a special purpose and for a special plan. And not only with the students that we got to teach, but also within our own community, within our own Avondale student community. We would have worships every night where we would uplift each other with words of gratitude and affirmations. And it just was such an amazing opportunity that not only Jason, but Kevin and Sherry got to be a part of and really nurture us. But something that was really cool that I felt quite loved with every day was at lunch, we would sometimes, Ethan and I, guilty, would hide in the classrooms and at the second week because there were kids that would run in and would pull us and be like, "Come play rugby with us, come do skipping." I was like, "No, I'm getting sensory overload." But yeah, it just was amazing. And the amount of love that the kids poured into us, not only the kids, but the teachers and our community, really reminded me of my belonging, not only within my community, but also my identity in God. So yeah, this trip was really amazing. And hopefully we get to experience this again in Samoa next year. Thanks, Karen.
So anyone that knows Elion, he is just a community maker. Now, I don't know many students that create community like Elion, so I thought it was very fitting that he talk about belonging and how important it is to balance the high levels of challenge that the students experience in a developing country. The third ingredients so we've got challenge, we've got belonging, is freedom. So these are probably my 3 most favorite words. And I've asked Tanner to just speak into this space. Tanner, every night Tanner came home, he was talking about this guy called Joe. And Joe was his supervisor teacher, and so I'm sure that he will feature. But thanks, Tanner. Just in a minute or two, share how you found the freedom experience in the classroom.
Yeah, so also I was lucky enough to go to Tonga, obviously. This Joe fella, everyone ended up bullying me about him because I was always coming back from a day at the school and I'd be like, "Oh, Joe said this, Joe did this today, Joe." He was yeah, he was one of my best friends in Tonga. But he was such a good guy, and this is like Jason said it over there as well. It was such just an God working moment. Like me and him just ended up being very compatible, and it was just an absolute fluke. But it was God working in there. But the freedom over in Tonga, obviously the classroom environment is very different, but we had so much freedom to experiment in the ways that we wanted to teach, and they're used to certain ways of teaching where it's kind of sit and write what we've written on the board. And then when we started experimenting with these things that we've been taught, getting like active teaching, going outside and in different environments, the kids really they really took it on really well, because I don't think they'd experienced much of that. But there was no real pressure, which I really enjoyed, no real pressure for me to kind of teach the way that the Tongans were teaching, or to teach the way that Joe was teaching. So I really had this freedom to teach in whichever way that I saw fit, which was really fun, and yeah, it really builds your teaching experience, I feel. Yeah.
Yeah, there's just rules in Tonga. There just don't seem to be as many. And I guess some of our students actually had the opportunity to go and dive with the whales. And in Australia, there'd be a lot more restrictions, let's just say that. And the same in a classroom. Malcolm knows, working in the Pacific Islands, they're more than happy just to vacate the classrooms. And we're just trying to, no, stay. You're required to stay and supervise, but they're just like, no, take my class. Which sounds like, obviously, you're not having the observations so much, but you're actually free, and they're happy for to try and make mistakes, and they laugh at mistakes. So it gives us the opportunity to try and grow, and I love that. So we're going to finish up really, really shortly, but just wanted to say that this story hasn't ended. Currently, we're preparing documentation for new scholarships for next year for 2 trips, one going to Fiji and one going to Tonga. And we're really, really excited about that, and hopeful that the Australian government will once again support these endeavours. Just very, very quickly, what have I really enjoyed about research? I think finally I have got that voice that I was yearning for to adequately explain what happens on these experiences and how to replicate them. And that's a really reassuring thing to carry around. But also I find the learnings flowing over into other parts of my life. Things like ACE Lab, a new initiative at Avondale. ACE Lab's all about building character through experiences, very similar to our experiences overseas in developing countries. But this time, we're developing character once again through challenges, once again through community and connection with people and God. So the learnings that I've actually taken from this particular study are now flowing over to other parts of my life. And I feel as though I'm well positioned to make a worthwhile contribution. So take those charts with you, put them somewhere that you will see often, and hopefully it's connected with one of your stories too.
All right, let us quickly change the technology. I will say I'm now slightly conflicted because normally I'm a reasonably good presenter, but I feel like I should do not quite as good a job, so Jason will feel better about himself. Let's see how that goes. You're up to a good start. Perfect. Okay, we're nearly there, folks. Happy to give you a mark for you to give me a mark out of 10 at the end, Malcolm. Right. Right on time. I had the privilege of being involved in a study that was looking at the role of churches that are on school campuses. And this is a study that we sort of finalised last year. But it's the sort of thing that CERC should be interested in. Because in education, what amazed me when I sit on the school company, the board of education in the North New South Wales Conference, is the amount that conference spends on education versus the amount they spend on the pastoral ministry teams. And I'll tell you, education far outstrips it. Seventh-day Adventist Church puts huge resources into their schooling system. And the issue, we need that schooling system to be good. Because what I know at the moment, we've got a bit of a challenge. And that challenge arises from the fact that we know that in John 10:10, Christ says, can I get rid of the Zoom people on my thing? How did I do that last time, Mr. AV man? Hit one of those? Yeah. Look at that. Well done. So we know that Jesus says in John 10:10 that the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy, but I've come that they may have life and have it to the full. And we know that we endorse to a lot of young people that if you are a spiritual person, if you have God in your life will be better. We lead with that argument all the time. Yet where I look around at the moment, everywhere I look, the life for young people is not always better. Now, just this morning, just as I was opening my eyes way too early this morning, in the ABC newspaper, there was this article. This report highlights that that young Australians, what you can't see there is it says, the report highlights the mental toll on young Australians amid the cost of living crisis. And it's talking about how kids from high school up are struggling, and particularly when they leave high school and first couple of years of university, many of them are not even able to have 3 meals a day because they don't have the financial resources to support themselves. And as the article went on, I know even here at Avondale, look, just a couple of years ago, there was a student in my class, and when I was talking to him because his assignment wasn't done on time, I found out he spent the entire semester sleeping in his car in the student car park. And so, many young people are struggling. But this article, when it went on, it actually says the problem is when they look at their futures and where they are now, but where Australia is going and the cost of everything escalating, they have no hope. Now, the minute you get no hope, when hope goes down, a lot of things become wobbly. And I've done previous research studies that shows when young people, when they have no hope, how all the bad things, that depression, anxiety is a big one, stress, how those things just seem to become very prominent in your life. So what we want to do is to give young people hope. And Emily Esther Funny-Smith is one of my favourite authors. She's actually a journalist in the United States, wrote this book on meaning. And she said, if you want your life to be great, really what we want to do is forget pursuing happiness. That's been around in positive psychology for a while, that idea. But she says, what we actually need for great lives is to have meaning in our life. And how do we get that? She says the 4 things that we should pursue is belonging, purpose, storytelling, that is being able to situate our life story in a greater narrative, but also experiencing transcendence. Now, this idea of transcendence is being connected to something that's bigger than us. And if you can experience transcendence, if you sort of have this feeling that there's something bigger out there, well, that situates your life in a context and could quite often start bringing that hope back in your life, particularly if you believe that that bigger picture is actually out there to support you. So we know that in Darren's book, Live More Happy, Darren features the idea that if you're spiritually connected, that your life will be better. Research has shown that people of a spiritual belief experience lower levels of depression, anxiety, and display signs of better health, such as lower blood pressure, all from having a spiritual belief. So Elia Wellness, which is the sort of church's wellness wheel, which Darren helped create, certainly you can see it at the bottom there, being spiritually empowered is one of the key dimensions of wellness that we're sort of chasing. So the question, of course, then, is that it would seem that if we can get young people, in particular, if their spirituality go up, we're actually expecting then that their well-being would go up. So when we see all these studies at the moment, like if I go and speak to Paul Borges, he just tells me that in Australian schools there's an anxiety epidemic, the amount of anxiety that's present. So how do we actually increase the spirituality of students in Adventist schools? That's what we want to know. And so for us in particular in this research study, the question was, can campus churches help? If you actually have a church sitting on the school campus, will that actually help? So it turns out if you travel around Adventist schools, and I've had the privilege of visiting most, I think there's 52, isn't there, in Australia? And I've had the pleasure of visiting nearly all of them, not quite, but nearly all. And when you go to places like Macquarie College, bottom left-hand corner, that's Wall's End Church sitting right there. If you go to North Point, they actually run a campus church, Refresh or whatever it's called, and it's run on their school campus. If you go here, and sorry, Malcolm, as a previous principal, this is the best photo I could find of Hills Adventist College that actually has. Oh, and of course, we have Greg here as well. This here is the church sitting right in the corner of that school campus. That, by the way, I pinched off a real estate site. Then, of course, if you go to the Central Coast School, they have the Haven, which is nestled in here. This is the Haven building. Used to be, when they first set up, used to be the school hall, but now they have a magnificent sort of gymnasium, so they use that for their religious purposes. And then if you go to Gilson College, Gilson has a Year 9 building. This is it. It's got the atrium out the front. That's that glass thing. But if you go in there, this is their Year 9 Purpose Centre, and on Sabbath it becomes their church building. So there's a bunch of Adventist schools, big schools at that have churches. So our research questions were, what is the role of these church plants in Adventist schools? And what is the impact of these church plants in the school and the local community? I mean, having a church on your campus, does it actually lead to high levels or increased levels of spirituality between students? So what we did is that we went out, and this was mixed methods. So we had just over 500 students complete a questionnaire for us and just over 80 staff. And then we followed up interviewing a whole bunch of students and staff. I forget the exact number, but it was around nearly 100 interviews that we did altogether. There was a whole bunch of them. This is when we're looking at the students. You can see that this is coming out of SurveyMonkey, so this is the questionnaires that we use. You can see that there was a mix of students that we managed to get across all the ages of schooling. And when we look at gender, we can see that just over 50% of our sample was female down the bottom compared to male. So of all these people that we had do our survey and then followed up and interviewed, when we asked them, what do you consider yourself? You can see just over 20% of them said SDA Christian, which in Adventist schools is actually not too bad, considering that I have been at some schools like Macquarie College. I think if you go there at the moment, the people who'd say that I'm a SDA on that campus would be below 10%. So Christian, but not SDA. So there's a whole bunch. Interestingly, over a quarter of them said, I am not sure what I am. My family is best described as, and when you look there, you can see that we've got about 20% say they're SDAs, and then about just under 30%. So just under half of the kids say that they are Christian. Certainly, there is a growing bunch of kids that when you talk to will straight out come and tell you that they are atheists. And it is interesting what that group of students, as you can see here, agnostic or atheist, was coming up towards 15%. What sort of impact that little group would have on your school campus. Then, of course, there's about a quarter of them are very unsure what their sort of family they come from. I regularly attend church. Well, what I can tell you is that when we ask them about church attendance, you can see about 10% of the student body basically said, I regularly attend the church on campus. Then another just under 10%, about 9% said, I regularly attend another Adventist church. So we ended up with about 19% of the people in our study who said they actually go to an Adventist church. Meaning there's about 80%, just over, who don't. So one of the interesting thing too is that if you look at the very right-hand column, I rarely attend religious services at all is about 50%. So one of the things that we soon realise is that when you're looking at does the campus church, does it actually enhance student spirituality? Well, the answer probably is it might if they actually went to it. Because when you only have 10% of the kids in that school going to the church, it really gives the church a limited ability to have an impact, doesn't it? What we did found, by the way, is that we proudly call our schools Adventist schools, but by far over half the kids in Adventist schools don't go to church at all, anywhere. And so it does make us wonder what's the best way to tackle spirituality of young people when a lot of young people, over half of them, are just not even buying into it in any way. All right, let's quickly go through because time is of the essence and I want to finish on time. How often do you attend? About 53% said rarely or not at all. And so what we do know, there is a group going to Adventist churches and to other Christian churches that go every week. but that's about a quarter of the kids in school, but a whole bunch of kids don't go to church at all. So when it comes to spirituality, what did we actually find out of this group? Well, we use this spiritual wellbeing scale. That's some of the items on the scale. If you want to see that in more depth, I'm happy to show it to anybody who wants to see it. And what we found that on average, students reported a moderate level of spirituality. On a scale of 1 to 6, the mean was 4.19. And so the midpoint's 3.5. So you can see there that they are, on average, in the positive when it comes to spirituality. There was no significant difference between genders. When we sort of see the mix, this is it. On the scale of 1 to 6, this is about where kids land in terms of their levels of spirituality. So there was no significant difference between regular attending groups. That is, it doesn't really matter in your level of spirituality whether you're a Seventh-day Adventist or another sort of Christian, or even a Hindu that was regularly going to a Hindu congregation. The average spirituality of those attending groups was high. That is, if you actually went to church regularly, you scored a mean of 5. Whereas if you didn't go, you scored a mean of 3.76. So it would say to me that is a significant difference. And so it does seem to me that if you do go to church, you will have a significant higher level of spirituality than if you don't go. We found that students who identify as Christian were significantly higher in spirituality than other groups. And, you know, that's a good thing because Christianity is very much, does have a saving culture and an uplifting culture. And it's good that those kids are really finding themselves sinking more with a God figure by attending. Students with a family background of SDA were not found to be significantly different to any other Christian group. And they're all sort of just the big mix there. There was a significant difference though in the years, with years 7 to 10 having a mean of 4.32 and years 11 and 12 a mean of 3.79, which was a significant difference down. And so one of the challenges that we have in schools is that kids come out of primary school where things are pretty rosy, and as they go through some of the high school stages, particularly as they're looking to become independent from parents and everything else, that they become less spiritual. And so sometimes I think that we need to have better models to communicate to kids as they come into those year 11 and 12 ages than sticking with maybe the Uncle Arthur type stories. Just a couple of things to finish off on. That this is the structured equation model that we come up with, and because my background is in maths, I always enjoy putting things up with numbers on it. But essentially, these are the variables of our study, and those numbers on there are standardised regression coefficients times 100, and the number gives us an idea of the strength of the relationship. Let me just comment on a couple of things as we finish. So does attending church actually matter when it comes to your level of spirituality? You can see here the regression coefficient for attending church is 14. So that would, for me, I would say it has a small impact attending church. If we go, what about discipleship? That is having people to work with you so that you will practice discipleship. Well, it turns out this is how we measured the scales that we're using to measure discipleship in the study. And then what we found out, if we come here and see discipleship, a regression coefficient of 44. It's 0.44, but it's 44 when it's times 100. And you can see that that is a moderate to large impact. And so it turns out that being discipled in some ways is more important than attending church. Another one that's interesting is mentoring. Mentoring, in general, this is the scales we use to measure mentoring. Is there someone outside your family who gives me helpful advice in life, etc.? And we found out when you come to mentoring, right down the bottom here, mentoring linking in, you can see that that also has a moderate impact. 24 is the regression coefficient. But one of the big things I think in the take home from this study is when we looked at church climate, the sort of climate that churches have. And here, items like my church or place of worship is a friendly place. Strangers feel welcome, you know, this sort of thing. We're measuring what the church climate's like. Interestingly, a positive church climate, as reported in our study, is one that's open, accepting, friendly and inclusive, a place where students feel they belong and they can learn and grow, a church that holds their interest where people care about them as individuals and they can actively grow and act out their faith, and is in synergy with the culture of the school. Now, the last one's a fairly big issue for us, because what we find is that if we actually have a positive church climate, look at all the great things that happen. Kids are more engaged in church as a result of being in a church that has a positive climate. They're much more likely to attend. 56, one of the biggest regression coefficients in the study. They are also much more likely to be discipled and much more likely to be mentored. So the main thing is that having a church on campus, what's really important is that that church has a church climate that is conducive to getting the students to be there. And if you have that positive climate, well, then lots of good things happen. So the problem for us is that as we went around to these churches, I don't want to identify any of them, but I can just tell you that of the schools that we went to, the 6 schools, only one had a church, campus church, where the culture of the church was in synergy with the culture of the school. And what we found is that if you actually end up with the school and the church being 2 completely separate organisations, you do not have good things happen. And so, and I'll give the example of Macquarie College. I sit on their board. I'm very close to Macquarie College. I'm a member of their alumni because I used to teach at that school many years ago. But what I'll say this is that they came together for geographical reasons. And it was simply that the Walls End Church was on the main road there and they were looking to expand. And so the conference said, if we go and buy that block of land, we're going to move Walls End into one corner and we're going to move the school onto it. And at one stage, they're going to put retirement village in there as well to make use of the land. So what you ended up with Macquarie College is that the church and the school ended up being in the same place, but there was never any synergy between those 2 institutions. The conference just located them there because it was cost efficient to do so. So when you end up with those sort of situations, you find out that the students just rarely go to that church because why would they? But when you get a lot of synergy between the actual church and that the church operates in a very similar way, if I make it quite simple, to the way that chapel at school operates, then you find when the kids go to that church and they see their teachers there and their friends there and the culture is the same, they're much more likely to attend. And we only found that in 1 of the 6 case studies in our research. So a couple of questions to leave you with. These are going to be rhetorical because we've run out of time. Is that what is our aim with respect to the spirituality of students in Adventist schools? Is our aim to get these kids to be spiritual or not? The majority of ASA students rarely attend church. Should we move our focus to the unchurched? Should we actually say our student cohort's unchurched, let's start treating them that way? Should we acknowledge that the dominant approach of students is the self-construction of belief, and should we facilitate that? Which is a politically loaded question, really, because I'm sure the church hierarchy is quite interested in the students having beliefs that are more in line with the Adventist beliefs. And if you adopt this sort of thing, that may not happen. And what can churches do to move to the sort of church climate that students are looking for? And how do we increase the synergy and cultural overlap of the school and the church on campus? I mean, I think having churches on campus, it can be a good news story, but it only really works if 1, we can get kids to go there, and 2, if the church has a very similar culture to the school. And in our experience, 5 out of 6 places didn't. So that's the challenge for us all, because there's a lot of turf protection that goes on to these places. And but I do think that if we can harmonise the cultures, I think great things can happen. The end. Well, with that, guys, it's 5 to 1. I'm sure people have got other things to do. So thank you very much for attending. I didn't feel the need to bring my family along to here, but thanks for Greg and Shirley for coming and supporting Jason. And we're really looking forward to seeing you guys at our next CERC presentation. So thank you very much. Thanks, Peter.